Welcome to episode 48 of the Giant Zone. You've got your co-host, of course, Steve the Banker.
Hello.
And you've got yours truly, Fly Guy Carl. And tonight we are very happy to have joining us on the show tonight is our good friend Mason. Mason, say hello. Welcome to the show, brother.
What's going on, guys? Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
And before we get started, guys, again, I just want to, I know I do this every show, but I'm going to ask you to please continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find us on Twitter. Please, you can give us 5-star reviews. If you like to download our shows, please give us a 5-star review. All that positive support just helps us continue to bring you good content. So we enjoy doing this. We do this for you. And all we ask is just please continue to support us and help us grow this. It's a community that's growing, want to keep growing it. So given that, and thank you, of course, Mason, why don't you just kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you became a Giants fan?
So became a Giants fan back in the early 80s. Fell in love with blue uniforms. My dad at the time he was living in Miami. My mom lived in Switzerland. So kind of bouncing between the two. Growing up in Europe, man, it sucked in the 80s. You had like no football coverage at all. So I'd literally go home with every single, all the old season previews of Street and Smith, the Athlon, what I'm trying to think, the Sporting News, all the different ones, I take like 10 or 12 of them home with me every year. And then my dad would he'd save the USA Today's for me on every Monday. So when I came back, I could read through the whole season because the only paper we had in Europe that covered American sports was the International Herald Tribune back then, and that was like a one-page sports section. It sucked. So it was horrible. Up until 1990, then the USA Today got its international edition over there, and we were able to I was actually able to read a full breakdown of all the games, see all the box scores and everything, and at least read that weekly, and get a full feel for the season, the off season, and everything, which you never got to before. So, but yeah, so ever since then, I came back to college and been a fan ever since. Been here ever since and love it. So
so what about game day? Do you have any game day traditions that you like to follow, or is it just kind of get in front of the TV and watch football all day?
Get in front of the TV and watch football all day, man. I keep it simple. It's like every time I try a superstition, the next week it doesn't work. So I gave up on them.
I get that.
Yeah. Man, do we get that?
Yeah.
So, we've got a couple things we want to talk about tonight. Steve, I'll start with you. We're through the big free agent signings, obviously. Before, I know we want to talk about what they did in free agency set them up for the draft. Do you want to just kind of review quickly some of the signings? Do you want to take that approach? You want to just kind of go right into just, hey, look, where are we at now given free agency and what are we looking at for the draft? However you want to play this, Steve, I'll let you run with it.
Yeah, I think most fans have a pretty good inkling now of what they've done. I think we have a lot of other really good stuff to talk about as well. So I want to make sure that we're respectful of Mason's time and that we fit it all in.
Sure.
So I mean, for me, I think when we look at the Darren Waller trade, which was obviously probably a surprise not just to me, but a lot of people, hopefully you guys as well, I was pleasantly shocked. And then of course the free agent signings that you said. I think the first thing maybe to kind of set the table tonight is how that sets them up for the draft. I think what we're seeing before us is such a prepared and smart front office, leaning into their own experiences in prior places where tight ends were the focus of the offense, but also leaning into what is not really going to be the strength of this upcoming draft. There's no Jamar Chase in this draft, right? I think everybody agrees. Everybody's hopeful. Some people feel they have to take a wide receiver, when they take wide receivers, how many. But I think what they've done in the offseason with the Waller trade and then the free agent signings, it's funny, Carl, and then I'll kick it back to you guys. I have a saying, you've heard me say this once before. The good news is they can take the best player available. because, of what they've done. The bad news is they could probably take the best player available because they actually need talent at almost every position on the roster. Technically, even a third quarterback. I mean, literally, we don't even have a third quarterback because Davis Webb is gone now. So, I mean, there really isn't a position on the team. So I think what this does is, yes, there is some positional value. I think Joe Schoen has shown in prior places, and he's talked about the fact that, like the Eagles, they're probably not going to draft a linebacker in the first round. Never say never, but I mean, there's certain positions probably not going to draft a running back. We could go through that. But I think what this allows them to do more than anything is it's fixed, or it's work towards fixing some of the things that we all know were an issue and they've talked about, like our run defense most glaringly. But it allows them to not draft for need. I think Shane is one of his most famous sayings is, I don't want to shop hungry, right? So I think there are definitely some positions we can talk about that we as fans, and that's one of the nice things about the three of us coming together, is talking about, hey, ideally in the first round, for example, what are the positions we'd like to see? But it gives them the luxury that, hey, if somebody who's like a top 10 drops to 25, because that does happen, especially with all the quarterbacks taken and teams overdrafting at offensive tackle, it maybe just push down those needs into the second and third days of the draft because, oh my God, this guy who's like a stud dropped from the top 10. So I think that's what they've done in free agency, and then the Waller trade has allowed them to do it. It allows them to really focus on best player available.
So, you kind of, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, okay? But you kind of touched on two different things, best player available or need. Which, if you had to pick, which way do you think Shane goes?
Well, that's what I love about this regime, is that they seem to understand they're unlike our last two GMs, which I think was a lot of the frustration. We're now seeing some of the players that were drafted actually were taught and coached properly, and they actually are becoming great. But the truth is some of them, they probably weren't drafted in the right places.
Right.
There is something called positional value where running backs, we all know running backs aren't valued like they were a decade ago. So I think it's where value marries need, and I think Shane seems to, and his staff that he's compiled, really seem to do a great. Like last year, they had 11 picks. I think we went into last year's draft saying, there's 11 or 12 needs, but there's no way they're going to address them. And they literally addressed every need. Now, not everybody guy's going to work out, and not every player is going to be a full-time starter, and some guys aren't going to be able to stay healthy, but he at least attempted to address every need. So anyway, I would love to hear what you and Mason have to say, but I think it's a combination, and I think both things can be true at the same time.
Mason, what are your thoughts?
Man, Steve hit on some good points. I think one of the things is, as we just go back through free agency, I wasn't a huge fan of the Daniel Jones contract just because of the math on it and the numbers, but I get it. I get why he did it, and it's water under the bridge. I'm not upset with the decision to do it. It's just more of how it was structured and everything else. The Darren Waller trade, like you guys said, kind of caught me off guard. I did like the fact though that if they were going to restructure a contract to push money into the future, they did it with a contract that had guaranteed money anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's guaranteed 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. It's not all that bad pushing it into the future. I do see them, potentially looking at using Darren Waller in the same way that Kansas City uses, Travis Kelce. I also do see the potential for them to, run a lot of 12 personnel. Obviously, a small sample size of statistics show that, Daniel Jones is significantly better out of 12 personnel than he is out of 13. So, definitely, sorry, not 13, 11 personnel. So, much, seems like a good move on paper. Hopefully that continues to work in his favor. Obviously, value signings at receiver and that sort of thing, kept himself, in line without giving long-term contracts to injured players, which is something that I think David Gettleman would have done. He probably would have signed, Paris Campbell to like a 3 or 4 year deal, knowing him. So overall happy with those moves. obviously there wasn't, there really wasn't a path to getting a true elite wide receiver that would be cheap in any way, shape, or form. So, based on where we are, it's a good move. Draft high value positions. Sign people for at value in free agency. It's something that I've been talking about for a couple of months. Actually, probably since early end of last year, I was already talking about that, seeing where the cap was probably going to be. And now they've got decisions to make. I think some of the decisions that are coming in the draft may impact how they handle Leo, Adoree, and Saquon going forward. So it'll be interesting to see.
So here's what I loved. Let me rephrase this. This is what I love about the way Joe Schoen operates. So we all knew coming out of the season last year that there was a glaring need at wide receiver. We all knew it. It's going to be the first pick. Bop, bop, bop. They're going to sign somebody. Great. Okay. And what does Joe Schoen turn around and do? He trades for a tight end, one of the best tight ends when healthy in the league. And he circumvents a weak wide receiver free agent class, and yet he still bolstered the pass catching offense. And that's why I'm so confident in, and I'm fascinated. I'm anxious to see what he does with this draft. I have my own thoughts about where they should go, first round, second round. But you know what? Who knows? But I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like with Gettleman, it was like, oh, geez, where's he going to go? With Schoen, it's like, what's he going to pull out of his bag of tricks this time? So I like what he's done in free agency. I think he set us up. To your point, Steve, I think what he's done in free agency has set them up to fill more needs in the draft. Without having, they can focus on an area need if they want to. But I think he could still get creative here. So, I don't know. I like what he's addressed some glaring. We still don't have a number one wide receiver per se. I don't think anybody's going to call Paris Campbell a number one receiver. We all hope that he works out. Last year was the first season that he played a full season. But Jameson Crowder, no. Jeff Smith, the guy they signed from the Jets, Paris Campbell, no, those aren't number one receivers. But I think he can wait if he wants to find that guy, maybe second, maybe third round, and fill other needs in the process. So I like what he's done. I'm excited. I don't know which way he goes, Steve. I'm like you. I'm on the fence. He can get creative and go best player available, or he can go for a need right at the gate. Who knows? But some of the needs that we thought were glaring needs coming out of the season are no longer glaring, or some of those needs have changed because of what he's done during free agency. So I'm excited about that. And I know, Steve, pretty soon we're going to get into, draft and players, and that we're not here yet. But, I like, look, Mason, you look like you're chomping on the bit to have that conversation too.
Let me, I always like to bring one or two, or tonight I have three little quick, fun facts that really make people think. And I think also what I enjoy about that is that it's not that I knew it going into it. It's that I had a hunch, I was curious. And then I learned, like, oh my God, I had no idea. And I think most people, when they hear these things, are like, huh, because everybody's been saying X. And now, Stephen, that you're saying that's like, so for example, you could have a number one wide receiver. Why? Well, you have to have a number one. And blah, 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 blah. The majority of the last 10 Super Bowls were won by two teams in particular that never had a number one wide receiver. Not a number one wide receiver by the definition of we all. And don't get me wrong, I want a number one wide receiver. We need one. We want one. But both of these teams, Kansas City, that's now won 2 Super Bowls, and New England, that won all those Super Bowls of the last decade. Now, granted, they had Mahomes and they had Brady. So it makes it a little bit easier. And we don't have that right now, right? I mean, maybe eventually Daniel will continue to develop and we can have that conversation. But those were two franchises that won multiple Super Bowls with a tight end, granted an all-time great tight end, but still Gronkowski in New England, Kelsey in Kansas City. This guy Waller, when he's healthy, was the number 2 or number 3 tight end in the NFL. I have his statistics here. He's a unicorn. So he's not like an 800, 900 yard guy. He's unbelievable. He's caught more yards. We've only had one tight end in the history of our franchise ever catch over 1,000 yards, and it wasn't even Jeremy Shockey, right? So I'm just saying we all are guilty, I think, of saying the crowd, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. Like we all kind of get into this frenzy of number 1 wide receiver. Listen, Kafka was in Kansas City. He knows what it is to use a tight end as your number 1 target. And Daboll was in New England with that offense. So they both have experience of what's our best weapons and how do we use them? And how do we take an advantage of what the defense is doing? So I'm excited. I don't think it's the end solution. But they didn't just settle. And Mason, to your point, the fact that they did all these short-term contracts, just the opposite of what we've seen in the past, right?
You know what? There's something actually, you touched on something really interesting. And actually, if you go back to 2006, teams, and I brought this up in several Twitter spaces. Go back to 2006. Look at roster construction, right? In terms of who teams are paying. I think and I'm talking the 06 season, not the 06 Super Bowl. I'm pretty sure that was 06 season was the Colts Super Bowl, if I remember that last one. The one that they won, but and then we won in 07. But that team, I think, was the only team that had a quarterback being paid in the top 10 with receivers being paid in the top 10 for cap hits. If you look throughout history, you find that same kind of trend with receivers. Again, on offense, pay your offensive line, pay your left tackle, pay your quarterback. On defense, pay one of your edges, pay one of your cornerbacks. Pretty simple. The rest, you kind of have to figure out how you're going to manage it, right? And where you're going to get your bang for the buck. Obviously, if you've got a great quarterback like Brady or Mahomes, it becomes a lot easier, right? Had a great quarterback with Eli, had some guys that they weren't making top dollar, but they were great receivers, right? You get smart players that can play smart football, that can execute your playbook. That's what matters.
And to your point about contracts, Paris Campbell's a 1-year contract. What is it? 1 million, I think, for the year against.
No, it's like 6 million.
Is it really
ballpark, give or take? I think his hit is like 3 point something, and then he can make up to like 6. I forget the details on it.
Waller's 1 year. All right, granted, it's 11 million, but given his injury history, if he underperforms or he's hurt, they could walk away after the season.
Carl, I think
they could walk away from Waller with about 7 million. I think it's like $7 million in dead money next year after the restructure.
And Carl, you hit the nail on the head. I think the majority of the other receivers, though, you can include Sterling Shepard, Jamison Crowder. These guys were all 1-year contracts, I believe, like veteran minimums or close to it.
Right.
Yeah. Slay was a 2-year deal, but they can get out of one if they have to.
Right.
And he could have gotten more money, he said, in Atlanta, and he chose less here.
And he's from the South. He went to Auburn. Is he from?
Yeah.
I think he's from Georgia, though. You know what I like about the Waller trade also? I actually think it's going to help Bellinger. I think
100%.
You're going to see more, like you said, mate. There's going to be more 2 tight end sets, all right, which is fine. But you know what? Bellinger was and I didn't understand this, Steve. And I think we spoke about this one on a show. A lot of people seemed down on Bellinger after the year, and I don't know why. I thought Bellinger was pretty good. I was pleased with him. I think I think his ceiling is high, but now he doesn't have to be the tight end right now. He could still develop. He could still adjust to the program. He can still hone his skills a little bit. I think this is a great move for him as well. So I'm just, and let's not forget what he's done on the defensive side of the ball either. Just very quickly, Bobby Okieri from Indianapolis. Who, Steve, I told you I liked him beginning of the free agency, and here they go and they sign. So they get that stay-at-home middle linebacker. What is he? 26 years old, 151 tackles last year. He had 18 against us at the end of the season. All right. They signed the cornerback from Detroit. That name just kills me. Army. There's depth there. Bobby McCain from Washington. All right, he was getting phased out, but who knows? They added some depth. And I know a lot of people thought, all right, well, they signed McCain to replace Julian Love. I don't think so. I think McCain is a body back there. You got Dane Belton back there. And you know who else they were also very pleased with? It was Jason Pinnock. So
Yes.
He's added depth. How many times have we said you can't have enough depth? So
Look,
I love the moves.
don't discount one of my favorite under the radar moves is Jeff Smith, the wide receiver from the Jets, not because he's going to be a great wide receiver for us, but he's one of the best special teamers in football. He's our gunner.
Mm-hmm.
And when they talk about our punter, who we all had like 1 week, we were like, oh, maybe he's got potential. Next week, we wanted the guy cut immediately, that punter. One of the things they talked about in the offseason so far is that, hey, a punter needs a gunner. Like people don't realize the nuance of that. And it's not something I ever really thought about. And this guy is one of the best. So now, I mean, and in New York, it's a numbers game. They can't keep everybody. So, for the Jets. So now we're going to get a guy that can help our special teams, because the one frustration I have, guys, is that a lot of the wide receivers we've signed, and they probably won't all make the team, like Trotter may not make the team. None of these guys are special teamers, really. And that was always my beef with Sterling Shepard. Oh, they should bring Sterling Shepard back. And I guess he's great. He's a great guy, great locker room presence. All that is true. When he's healthy, he's great. He's never healthy. But it's not like he'll play special. Like none of these guys play. So we all complain about the specials. Well, you need guys who could play special teams. So now that addresses that, hopefully.
4.340. And he also returns punts, by the way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean the Sterling Shepard signing to me just didn't make sense. I mean, I get it for posterity reasons, but I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't make the roster.
I agree.
yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I honestly do. I agree with that. All right. So given that, biggest remaining needs, what do you think, Mason?
Biggest remaining needs. So obviously, to me, it's probably cornerback is really the biggest need, right? Aside from wide receiver, probably par one to one. I'm assuming that they're going to let Zudu play left guard and start the season, which I think is probably the right move to make. I hope he's putting in the same kind of work that we're seeing or we're hearing that Evan Neal is putting in. Obviously center is going to be a need, but hopefully Bredesen can hold that down. Wide receivers still need. I think one of the things I tweeted about a couple of days ago, about a week and a half ago, was I think defensive line might actually come up as being something that we do early in the draft, and particularly because it does give them some potential flexibility to move on from Leo, right? You move on from Leo, get a defensive lineman. You can now bring in a Sean Robinson, and you got a defensive line that's stabilized, right? Across all three positions at the DL, right? As opposed to just having two guys, if that makes sense. Long term, they also got to bring in somebody to eventually replace Dory. I'm surprised they haven't been talking to either Leo or Dory about an extension, but that tells me that I'm guessing they're probably open for business with them, because Shane's been talking about that. That's one thing that's been a consistent theme with him this entire offseason is we're open for business, right? And, a lot of the, you follow a lot of the top scouts on Twitter and they'll tell you, these guys are dropping hints the entire offseason. If they're open for business, they're going to let teams know. So to me, that means that we're probably going to be making moves in the draft. I think probably down to, hopefully pick up more picks because it looks like the real value is in, the second and third round, and early day three, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where I see things really kind of working. But I think long term they have to obviously address, the defensive line, quarterback, wide receiver, potentially the internal offensive line, but that can be done, day three for right now. And running back, potentially find a replacement for Saquon.
Ooh.
What are you thinking, Carl?
Yeah, so I understand the point about defensive line, and I'm one of the first ones to say you can never have enough quality depth on both lines, offensive and defense. They did sign Raheem
Nacho.
Roaches, right? Who's going to instantly join? He's going to jump right into the rotation, but I'm not counting on him to be a replacement for Leo, especially or Dex.
No.
He's a career rotational lineman. So I wonder if that drops the need on defensive line down a little bit. I could be wrong. But again, I do understand the point. Obviously, look, center is a glaring need. I still think our starting center may not be on this roster. I think that's coming out of the draft. I honestly do. I think Bredesen will be good if they do draft someone, maybe to kind of help that along. But I see that position coming out of the draft. Obviously, cornerback. To your point, Mason, are they going to resign Adoree Jackson, or does Adoree Jackson walk after the season? And again, you can't have enough quality depth back there. We discussed wide receiver, inside linebacker, of course, and an offensive line. So those are the big areas of need in my eyes. I'm not saying I wouldn't be happy if they drafted a stud, defensive lineman. Of course, I whatever. I'm good on that too. But I'm just in my head questioning, because I thought that was coming out of the season. I thought that was a big need, but I wonder if that's kind of dropped down a little bit with some of the moves. Steve, what are you thinking?
So I'll give you the four positions that I think in order are most important. And then I promise I'll very quickly address what you guys, especially Mason, some of the positions you just said. For me, I said it at our last episode, center is my number one. I've heard the term before. I'm not so smart that I thought of it, but I hijacked it because I think it perfectly describes the center position. It's a force multiplier. It's undervalued. Centers typically aren't drafted in the first round. Usually every year there's maybe one. Travis Frederick was drafted. There's been a bunch over the years, but if you get more than one, that's an outlier. You usually don't get more than one center in the first round. Center's a force multiplier. Listen, there's a reason the two Super Bowl teams had two of the best centers in football. Great offensive lines. When you have a great center who actually is calling protections, they can do double teams. They can pick up stunts. They give you that flexibility so the tackles don't have to help with the twist and the stunts for the guards, so they can help the guards. Think about our Super Bowls when we had Sean O'Hara, and then over and over, you don't see great teams, and at least forget great, just good offensive lines that don't have a very good center. You get a young center in there who's actually played center his whole career. What's nice about this draft is there's a kid that everybody talks about in the first round, and I was like, 25, if he drops to 25, we should take him. I'm starting to think, and everything I'm hearing, and we talk about other shows that we listen to, there is at least anywhere from 4 to 6 potential starters at center to be drafted, and you can get them on day 2. Now, my concern is I don't know if you're going to get them at the bottom of the first, the bottom of the second, the bottom of the third, where the Giants are picking. That's the nuance of it. So how does Shane finagle that? I don't know. But my number one need is center. By all accounts, Bredesen has been on 2 other shows, Jordan Raynon and Art Stapleton. He's talked with both of them about how he's been practicing center now. But listen, for my money, he was our best guard. He was our best left guard last season when he played. All of a sudden, Saquon's holes opened up. So now you move him to center. Listen, Mason, you mentioned left guard. I think, Paul, you mentioned Josh Azudu. He's had that neck injury. I think we have a ton of guards on the roster who are all going to compete. We still have Shane Lemieux. He's still on his rookie contract. He was supposed to be our starting center last year, but again, he had the turf toe. We have Josh Azudu, who I think they picked in the third round because the hope is he's going to be our next left guard. And we still have Marcus McKeithen. That guy is a house. 6'7", 340 pounds. Josh Azudu's teammate from North Carolina. They were actually pretty high on him when he drafted him. So I think they've created just a lot of competition at left guard. I
And
see.
he was having a great camp, if I remember correctly, last year, right?
Yes.
I mean, and he's
I seem to remember Duggan talking about him and Art a lot. So
my hope is that he's our future right guard. But again, so look, if Osiris Torrance, by all accounts, the top guard, and we don't need to get individual names, but like that's the guy, like everybody agrees out of Florida. If he's there at 25, again, best player available. If he, Carl, to your point, if one of the top 10 players in the draft, maybe like a defensive tackle or an edge, drops to 25, listen, we saw the Giants do it with the NASCAR when we won those last two Super Bowls. I like to always reference they drafted Justin Tuck in what was it, the second round? It's like, why would you draft Tuck? We had Strahan, we had Osi. Thank God they did. And then they drafted Kiwanuka later on. It's like, why would you draft Kiwanuka at Boston College? Listen, sometimes those premium positions, Mason, to your point, corner, edge rusher, you can't have enough of them. They're also more expensive on the free agent market too, for a reason. So I think it allows us, getting back to what we talked about earlier, best player available. I think center is probably going to be too early in the first round, but that's my number one need. Corner is my number two. Here's my thing with Adoree. The last two seasons, he's been a top 10 corner in the NFL in terms of coverage ability, stickiness. Problem is your number one corner. And by the way, I should say what I saw when Wink took over the defense, along with Jerome Henderson continuing as their coach, he all of a sudden started supporting the run better than I ever saw from him. So it was like he's become an all around, for my money, just great CB1. But here's the one thing he's lacking. And we all know this. The guy never gets an interception. He's never met an interception he likes. And we root for him to just get an interception like every once in a while. And he just can't. The guy was a track star, but he wasn't like a football. Like he just can't hold on to it. You got to have a CB1 creating turnovers. And I think
that's why they play corner, right?
You would think.
It's the number one strongest position in the draft. The other two are, by all accounts, running back and tight end. And obviously, we're not going to pick that in the first round. So, look, I think we have enough cornerback depth to get by, but we need to add tremendous talent. And this is the draft to do it. They very likely may hit that in the first round. They may hit it. What's nice is there's enough depth. You can get some potential future starters in the second or third. So I think it's arguable if it's your number one, but for me, center's one, cornerback two, Sam linebacker is my number three. We love Beavers. Carl, that was your boy, but that injury takes usually at least a year or more. Luckily, he got injured early on. Unfortunately for us, so we didn't get to really see him in his rookie year, but the good news is he got injured early on. So hopefully they think, the whisper talk has been that maybe he's recovered. But listen, what did we see last year? Linebackers get hurt a lot. I mean, McFadden played. I mean, you go like they had to sign an old number one pick from Detroit. He ended up Gerard Davis. Thank you. Former number one pick out of Detroit that they let go. Like linebackers just keep getting injured. So I would not be surprised if the Giants add a linebacker in the third or fourth round somewhere. There's some really nice linebacker prospects, maybe not first round, but to me, we need to continue to add talent to that group. Is it our first or second need? No. But even after signing Okereke, they got to add more. He's a weak side linebacker. That guy's a runner, covers the field, but he's not taking on the tight ends. He's not your strong side linebacker. We need a thumper. And if Beavers isn't ready or if he gets hurt, and then my fourth one is wide receiver. Obviously, we need to continue to add talent, but I don't want to force it. I'm personally not that high on any of the wide receivers in the first round, except for the kid out of Ohio State. He's probably 99% he's not going to be there.
Right.
So I'm just concerned that all the fans are like, we got to take a wide receiver. We got to. It gets back to what was so great. I'm sorry?
To your point, don't force it.
Don't force it. So I love what you guys said. But the one thing I'll finish with is, and it gets back to what we talked about earlier about a free agency and getting Darren Waller, what it affords us to do. Don't be surprised. I don't think it's likely because we do have real needs, right? Like cornerback, wide receiver. I mean, we've just talked about it. But don't be surprised if like an unbelievable D lineman, it could be a D tackle or an edge, drops that everyone thinks is a top 15 pick, drops to 25. I'm just saying. And you know what? It could throw us for a loop, but what if the guy's a phenomenal player, like a true top 15 pick? It could happen
But Steve,
in this draft.
aren't we saving the don't be surprised segment until the end of the show?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I forgot about that.
You know,
I totally
it's kind
forgot.
of
You
funny
got me.
though. Steve, you're hitting the nail on the head. The reality is it'll depend on the delta on talent, right? Like if you're sitting there and you have, I don't know, let's say you're looking at JSN, Deontay Banks, and Cam Smith. Let's just say, in the first round at 25, and then all of a sudden you there too. Now you've got a real decision to make, right? Cam Smith is probably,
Amen.
a lot of people have him down in the second round, but you got this guy who's truly a top 15 talent. Do you go for him over JSN or Deontay Banks, right? That's a tough call. That's a really, really hard call. Let's say, you have Schmitz there. Listen, you still got Tippmann and Whipper that could come down in the third. So, what do you do then? So
Mason,
it's
Mason,
definitely.
Mason, you know what you're really saying? And Carl, you and I talked about this on our last show, in our "Don't Be Surprised" section, which I should have waited. Maybe what we see is Shane in a position like that drops a couple, picks up some extra draft collateral, and says, "You know what? I don't care which of these four guys drop. If I drop 4 spots or whatever the drop is, that could be, you know what I'm saying? Like
I'm gonna get
what
him.
you're describing,
Right.
what
Right,
you're describing
exactly.
is the wheeler and dealer that he might be,
Yeah.
smart, picking up some extra picks and going, you know what? Let the draft fall to me, baby.
You guys both just took my don't be surprised because my don't be surprised was going to
Sorry.
be don't be surprised if Shane moves. And then the other one was don't be surprised if Deontay Banks is the first pick. So now I'm struggling here. But all right, I got a minute or two to think about that. So let's
But let me ask you both real quick, yes or no, would you be upset if I'm talking like a top 10, top 15 edge rusher, and there's a couple of them up there that everyone's thinking, oh, this one guy. Again, let's not get into names, but you probably know who I'm talking about. Everyone's watching and listening. There's one out of Texas Tech. There's some monsters out there. If one drops to 25 and he picks him, he says, I just couldn't pass it up. That does two things. One, we love Aziz. We all love Aziz, but Aziz can't stay on the field. But now you got 3 pass rushers. And number two, if that guy's dropped, the odds are, Mason, to your point, some of these other players, like you just mentioned, are probably just continuing to get pushed, which means other talent's getting pushed because there were players above that no one thought were going to be picked. And we see that. We see that every year. Would you be upset, Carl, Mason? Would you be upset, yes or no, if they took a premium edge player to add to that now a 3-player rotation for us at 25? Would you be upset? Because that's not what we're thinking. Everyone's thinking wide receiver, they're thinking corner, and some people are thinking center. Would you be upset if they took a pass rusher, like a real top 15 type pass rusher?
absolutely not. And my 2 examples to support that number one, like you mentioned, Strahan, Justin Tuck, OC. They beat the living hell out of Tom Brady and then won us the Super Bowl. Can't have enough talent. And number 2, look at last year's draft. We all kept saying, offensive line, need that tackle. And here comes Thibodeau. And Thibodeau's shown that he's going to be a good player. So, absolutely not. I'm on board.
Mason, what about you?
I'm a little hesitant to call Ojulari an injury problem because this was the first time he's had an injury issue, right? He put on a lot of weight, put on a lot of muscle last year, and some of the injury issues were related to potentially, bulking up and maybe not having as much flexibility as he should have had. So I would rather give him another year. Also, just based on the potential for staggering contracts, giving yourself another year with Thibodeau, being a rookie last year, going into the second year gives you a little bit more time to sort of stagger contracts down the road. They were really high on Tamon Fox. Would like to see what they can do with him in year two. And then the question is, if one of these guys does fall, is it a guy that they can use on the defensive line, or is it a guy that would be playing the edge position, that outside linebacker position for Wink, which is more of a Sam role, right? He likes linebackers that can both cover and rush the passer. So the question is how well does he fit the scheme relative to what else is there? If you have somebody moving up, and let's say Nolan Smith is there, and they're moving up to pick Nolan Smith, hey, drop down that extra spot or those extra spots and pick up some additional picks depending on what's going on and what the board looks like. Because it could very well be that Nolan Smith may not be a fit. So I would trust them. I've said, hey, I'm for moving down. I'm for moving down early and then moving up, from late day 3 into earlier day 3, if that makes sense.
So
Aziz didn't get injured his rookie year.
I
I
was
thought he
ju-
also got injured.
I was just going there myself, Steve. So he played 7 games last year, and he's played 24 in his career. So he had to miss some time his rookie year.
No, that's 17
Yep.
plus 7 would be 24.
Yep.
Oh, wait, no. He missed 7 games last season, you're saying?
He only
Yeah,
played.
he missed like 10 games last year.
Yeah, he only played 7 games last year.
All right, so 17 plus 7 is 24. There you go. I was wrong. For some reason, I thought he was
You know
injured.
what, Steve? I was with you. I thought he was hurt toward the end of his rookie season too.
Yeah, a lot of people have that misconception. There was also a report about a knee issue, degenerative knee issue in college, which
Maybe
they
that's
it.
dismissed. They
Yeah,
dismissed that issue. But while he was in college, he didn't miss any time.
maybe
So-
that's had me anyway. I can only speak for myself. Interesting. All right, so the last thing that we had planned on talking about was how Darren Waller impacts the offense. I know I've kind of pretty much covered it. Does anybody have anything you guys want to add about that?
Mason?
I mean, I think Waller's really going to open up the offense. I think he's going to obviously draw coverage. That's something that we haven't had in a long time here. A player that can actually draw coverage, and make teams pay if they don't cover him, if that makes sense. That's going to, I believe, open up opportunities for the other receivers. I think that's going to, open up opportunities, obviously, for Darius Slayton, with crossing routes, that sort of thing. I think it's going to open up opportunities for Paris Campbell. I think it's going to, and Paris Campbell has the ability to play both inside and outside. So it really depends on where they see him really kind of scheming in, right, into the offensive scheme. So that could impact, how they go about the draft. I mean, they visited with the kid from Cincinnati, what's his name, Tyler Scott. They visited with Zay Flowers. They had dinner with JSN. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. I mean, obviously, people are talking about Zay Flowers coming down into into that low first round, early second round. I'm not a huge fan just because I do believe that wingspan matters, but depending on how they really want to use him, it could get interesting. But Darren Waller is going to be a huge addition. He can play outside. He can play obviously inline. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they utilize him, how they make him, how they play him. He's going to be a huge mismatch against linebackers. He's a mismatch against safeties and against obviously quarterbacks are small, you know. So it's gonna be really interesting to see how these guys actually use him.
Steve?
Let me give you guys so I agree with everything Mason just said. I think having Waller there, having a two tight end set with another tight end in Bellinger, who, listen, he's not on his way to getting a gold jacket. He's not one of these elite pass catching tight ends, but you get in the red zone, and what Kafka did with him, all of a sudden he did have that athleticism. He had a couple plays last year we saw where he that one in particular on the left sideline where he dove into the end zone, gets creative in short spaces. In short spaces, he runs excellent routes, but he's not going to be a guy between the 20s that's going to have the explosive play. But you don't need him to, because now if you got Waller there, the defense now is to prepare for two tight ends. And Bellinger's a hell of a blocker, as we saw. I think he literally had one whiff last season that ticked me off. I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Other than that, the guy was clean, excellent blocker. We knew that he had that skill set. So now you got two tight end sets. And you have the ability, Mason, as you just said, to open up the field. I think their focus is going to be just adding speed to the offense. I think we've seen that with some of these signings for sure. But I'll give you guys two quick facts. One, you may have seen me talk about this on Twitter. 16 of 32 teams. So I did a quick study. I looked at every NFL team. I looked at their current depth chart. So obviously this can change. Somebody drafts a wide receiver, makes them the number one wide receiver. Obviously, the beginning of camp, somebody gets hurt. Things can change. As of today, the 16 of the 32 teams with a legitimate number one wide receiver who was not drafted in the first round. Now, that's, of course, taking out New England and the Giants, who, for my money, don't even have a good number one wide receiver. We can all agree, probably, right? So there are a couple teams that, don't even have a number one. But of the teams that the rest of the NFL, they have a number one wide receiver. Legit. 16 of those. Their number one wide receiver was not drafted in the first round. And if everyone's watching or listening, going, oh, come on, that's crap. Deebo Samuel, round 2. Stephon Diggs, round 5. Tyreek Hill, round 5. DJ Metcalf, round 2. By the way, his partner in crime, Tyler Lockett, was somebody said, well, he's their number one. Okay, fine. Well, he was drafted in round 3. Amon-Ra St. Brown, round 4. Deontay Johnson, the Steelers, the guy had like 1,200 yards this season. We're going to start hearing more about him. Round 3. Terry McLaurin. Everybody knows Terry McLaurin. We see him twice a year. Round 3. AJ Brown. Oh my God, that guy was a beast in the Super Bowl, in the playoffs against us. Round 2. Kupp. The guy was the darling 2 seasons ago. Unbelievable. Best wide receiver in football 2 seasons ago. Round 3. I could go on and on and on. The point is, listen, everybody chill out. If the Giants don't take a wide receiver in the first round, it's okay. And if somebody says, well, there's no wide receiver ones in the draft, maybe not. But here's the other misnomer. What does everyone think of when they think of a number one wide receiver? Now, we got Waller. So I think we got the guy who brings height. He's like 6'5", right? 6'6", I think. Waller. And then Bellinger, I think, is 6'4" or 6'5" himself. So we have some height. Hodgins is 6'4", but he's not our number one wide receiver. But we have some height out there. Everyone else needs to stop with this assumption that the boundary X receiver must be tall, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". And a number one wide receiver must be tall, 6'3", 6'4". Does it make it easier? Yeah. Would we all like to see Plaxico Burress at 6'5" again? Of course we would. Stephon Diggs is 6 feet tall. Amon-Ra St. Brown is 6 feet tall. Christian Kirk, he's an excellent wide receiver, 5'11". Devontae Adams is 6'1". Chris Olave is 6'1". Chris Godwin's 6 foot. I'm almost done. Jerry Jeudy is 6'1". Tyreek Hill, 5'10". Jalen Waddle is 5'10". And Deontay Johnson, who I just mentioned, is 5'10". Ladies and gentlemen, listen, they don't have to get a wide receiver in the first round. If Shane believes there's a wide receiver in the first round that's worthy of it, I support him. But if we get a wide receiver, and maybe multiple wide receivers I'd like to see, further down, they don't have to be tall. They don't necessarily have to be assumed they'll never be a number one. I think there's a lot of potential in this draft for wide receiver as well, but I think that's what getting Waller does for us. It opens it up and it allows this coaching staff, who've shown to us they have a knack of scouting and finding talent that they know will fit into this offense throughout the draft.
And so first of all, Steve, Darren Waller, 6'6", 255.
There you go.
Now, Darren Waller he can also get downfield. Let's keep that in mind. He's not one of these tight ends where he's just going to run, you're going to hit the quick slant. He can get open downfield. He can go up and get the ball. One thing that I failed to mention earlier is if you look at a lot of the receivers that the Giants have on the roster and or brought in this offseason, you've got there are a lot of slot receivers. To your point, they all play inside. Okay. To your point, Steve, before everybody sits here and screams, whatever the number one, let's take a look. Let's step back and take that 1,000-foot overview. Maybe we need to look at what kind of offense the Giants are trying to run. What is the system that they're trying to put in place that they're adding these types of guys? They didn't go out and make a trade for T. Higgins. They didn't go after that big outside guy, that number one guy. Maybe there's a reason for that. And I'm just going to go back to what I've been saying all along. In Shane, we trust. That's all I'm going to say. If Joe Shane says, I'm signing these guys, just follow me, he's done enough to get my vote and my support. So I think the Darren Waller trade and addition opens up more possibilities in this offense where they can do more. They can get a little fancy and creative if they want to. So the only downside I could see to this trade is if the injury bug bites him in the ass again this season. Then it was a failed trade. But if not, what he can potentially do for this offense, all upside. I'm very excited about it.
Do either of you guys remember what Shane said at the combine when they interviewed him about the most important trade he's looking for in the wide receiver right now?
I don't.
Speed and ability to separate, if I remember correctly.
Correct. Separation.
Very good, basically.
That's right.
So
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, for me, the team right now, there's going to be another break glass scenario that's going to happen, right? Team's got about $2.3 million in space right now. And just like last year where they had to restructure Leo at the end and that sort of thing and fiddle with Slay's contract to make a little bit of room. There's going to come a point where Shane's going to have to make a decision about 3 contracts in particular, not including, what's going on with Dex and his extension. He's going to have to, make a decision about how he's going to handle Leo's deal, Adori's deal, and what he's going to do with Saquon. He said he's comfortable, carrying Saquon at 10 for the year. However, at the end of the day, he has to make the space. One way or another, space needs to come. We need about at least $15 million in space just to, have room for, the season, practice squad, and the class, right? In terms of the actual space needed. So I really wouldn't be surprised if, for whatever reason, he actually ends up moving on from one of these guys, one way or another, depending on how things play out. It would be a shocker if it happens, but I could definitely see it happening. Dex extension probably, depending on how they structure it, might save you $6 million. So that plus having to make that additional space, and maybe bring in somebody to replace Leo. I really think that Leo is probably may not even be on the team next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. That's really kind of my surprise move that could end up happening.
So Mason, I was just going to ask you, of the 3 players that you named, Adoree Jackson, Leonard Williams, and Saquon Barkley, which one would you think is the most likely to not be a Giant? You're going to say
Leo.
Names?
Yeah, right. Because I think that they're gonna still lean on Saquon this year because they don't have they didn't get there wasn't a receiver market out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I still think they need to have a balanced approach offensively. Does look I do hope that they do take the approach that they did in the second half of last season, which was throw a little bit more on first down, which obviously ate into Saquon's reps, right? The reason they were trying to figure out a lot of other things in the first half of the season. If you listen to what the coaches have actually talked about, so for me, I think they still they keep Saquon around probably another year, and let him go next year, because next year he'd have to be tagged at 120% of what he's tagged at right now. For him to sign, for him to get retagged, so to speak. So, he's got no reason to really sign for anything less than $11 million a year. But with the draft, all of a sudden people get stupid, people get antsy, like we were talking about, and if they want to make a crazy trade, next thing you know, they're somebody's dumping a trade for Saquon, Leo, or I doubt they move Adoree, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of the three does get moved. But I do think Leo is the least likely of the three to be on the roster if any of them get moved.
All right, so we started something last show where, although Steve jumped the gun on it this show, where it's we end with a "Don't be surprised" segment. So, gonna go around the room here, and everybody's got to come up with their one "Don't be surprised" statement. So, Steve, you jumped the gun. I'm going to start with you. Don't be surprised. What, Steve?
Well, obviously, I mentioned like a top 15 type of edge rusher, or maybe even a D tackle if there's one or two that are spicy to consider. But ultimately, I think what's more than likely is, and I talked about this at the last show, is that he either stays put and puts hopefully tremendous value, but one of the top two needs, where he trades down. But don't be surprised. I don't see him keeping all four of those day three picks. We have one pick in the sixth and three in the seventh. I think he's going to move up, or trade some of them for some future assets. But I know I'm probably speaking out of both sides of my mouth. There's 10 picks. We can easily say we have at least 10 needs for sure. But I don't know. Mason, you just mentioned the fact that they needed probably another 15 million. I agree with you. Sign them for some maneuverability in free agency, adding some guys that may get cut to continue to strengthen our roster and to sign our draft class. I don't know that he keeps all 10 picks this year.
Mason?
I'm going to say I wouldn't be surprised if we see him trade down out of the first round and then trade down again later on, depending on how players shake out.
So two trades.
Potentially trading down and then trading up into earlier day three, right? So I do think that if a guy, as much as a Nolan Smith, is a great name and that sort of thing, and God, I'd love to draft him. It depends on whether he's a fit or not, and that sort of thing. They can, if they can actually make that work. Another guy that could end up being in there in that second round mix is Jack Campbell, right? Jack Campbell, great linebacker. But again, is it necessarily something that they want to replace right now, right? Or are they going to let Beavers roll, right? Do you necessarily force it with Campbell, or do you let another team that's really looking at Campbell come in, take him, and then you move down again, acquire some more assets, pick some more players, which again, by doing so, you also reduce the amount of cap space that your class takes because of the way the cap allocations work. So it is a move where you could actually acquire more players, reduce the cap space constraints, and also acquire more assets, maybe even move into a few better positions for next year as well.
All right. So since you guys have both kind of stolen my buzz here.
You could have gone first.
Well, no, I'm a team player. So, all right. Don't be surprised. You guys suck. All right. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Saquon is signed to a contract before camp.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Question is how much? How many years?
Well, Mason, this is our show. You can't make the rules here, man.
All right. No.
Go ahead,
Let's have a little fun.
No,
how many years and like what numbers do you think it would look like?
Oh shit. Ooh, I'm sorry.
Let's
Let's go.
Don't be surprised.
Let's go 3 years, option for a fourth.
Okay, I like that.
And I'm gonna say Ooh.
I think they offered him 12 and a half
I was just gonna say somewhere in the
originally.
neighborhood of 12, I'm saying 12 million a year.
So you think they'll go back close to what the whisper talk is that they supposedly offered him that, right? Like 12
Right.
and a half. And he,
Hold it.
in my
Right.
opinion, not to draw on some Yiddish here, like a schmuck, he turned it down,
Right.
overestimating the market. And we all know how it played out. So you think that Shane might go back and honor that, or
Close to it. I think he's going to approach it.
okay.
Yeah.
And Mason, you're like the cap expert with this. I mean, he can get creative with that, right? With incentives and
Yeah,
all
I
that jazz.
mean, he could get creative with it. I mean, realistically, he could pack it in with incentives. He could, he could do like the Kamara deal where it looks like it's $15 million on paper, but it's really for 12 and a half, right?
Signing
So it could
bonus,
really end up
something like
paying,
that. Right.
yeah, it could really end up being like like a 310, like a 330, paying
Right.
10 a year, whatever it is.
Right.
So there are different ways to put it together. Um, you know, personally, I've actually, I actually suggested this, the other day on Bleacher Report. I said, look, I said they should cut him, bring in Kareem Hunt, or trade him for even for hell a third round pick, whatever. Get rid of him, move on from him, get an asset, bring in Kareem Hunt for $3 or $4 million, pick up a guy or two in the draft. Maybe a UDFA, do a running back by committee approach, but fix other areas that are more important, especially after you invest $40 million in a quarterback. You know,
All right. We'll see. That's my,
Oh, that was a good one though, Carl. I wasn't expecting that.
yeah.
yeah,
I've kind of been sitting on it, all off season. I kept saying to myself, I think he's going to be here. I think they're going to get this done. So I had nothing else to go with, Steve. You guys killed me. So I had to use it.
Tell you guys one last one that I'm curious what you both think. And Mason, you sort of touched on it. I personally think Adori's gone after this year. And it's okay. It's I really, really like him as a player, as a person. He's a quality, he just seems like a quality guy. You can't have enough great corners and speed. And we saw what happened when they let Bradbury go because of the salary. But I think Adori's gone after this year. Man, how they can't let Leo play. What is it? 32 million? They can't cut him. It's only like a $12 million cap savings or whatever. There's a ton of dead money there. They Jane keeps talking about how he does not want to do any more, extend and blend, so to speak, like extend, like Gettleman used to live off that. It's like it's the antithesis of what he wants to do. We've seen him do it a little bit last year out of necessity, but like, what are they gonna do with Leo?
well, so that's the tough part, right? So an extension for Leo is going to keep his cap hits because you would have to do it as a 3-year deal, right? So you would essentially rewrite his number this year, his salary this year, and then write it as a 3-year deal. But you're going to get out after the second year with $3 to $4 million in dead money in the final year. The way it would end up working out mathematically is you'd have about a $20 to $24 million cap hit this year, $20 to $24 million cap hit next year. But it just really depends on what base number he wants, right? Guaranteed for those 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's where the difficulty comes in, right? You can fiddle with the signing bonus a little bit. That's why I said, if you add a little bit you have that third year with the signing bonus, so you can put like $3 or $4 million into that signing bonus, annually across the board, so you can lower the cap hits a little bit in the second year, but you're still hit because you have to keep the $14 million hit for his signing bonus this year and the $6 million in next year. That's what complicates his extension so much, right? You can't re-amortize those, if that makes sense. You can't
I feel like
reprogram.
they gotta rework it. He's still relatively young because he came into the league so young.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first season he was hurt. He's never been hurt. This will be his ninth season. You're paying a guy who you want like Aaron Donald production, but he had that one great season of sacks, but other than that, so no matter what, you're overpaying him, but what he means and what he allows us to do with Dex and then free up the linebackers, you're not going to find that. Carl, what do you think? Do you think they're going to cut him, rework him, or let him play on a $32 million cap hit?
Well, I'm going to go back to your first question. Your first question was Adoree Jackson.
Mm.
Okay. And I'm going to say that, and look, I agree with what we said about Adoree Jackson earlier. He's an interception, just not going to happen. But I just want to remind you both, when this defense was playing well for the first half of the season, Adoree Jackson wasn't getting interceptions, but no, they weren't catching balls on him either. He was, if you remember, he was our best shutdown corner, and he did a great job of it.
He was.
My answer to you is if he can put because when he got hurt, that's when our defense started tailing off a little bit. And then a lot of other injuries happened too. He wasn't the only one. But my point is, Steve, to answer your question, I think if Adoree Jackson can play a full season like he did the first half of last season, I think he comes back. And I think Leonard Williams goes.
I would love for us to draft a true CB1 in the first round. They'll have a little growing pains. There's a very few Sauce Gardners, right? They're not going to come in and be like, I mean, you never know, but still. And then year number 2, there are CB1, and maybe Adoree moves over to CB2. I'd be okay with that.
Thank you. So, look,
that
Steve,
I'd be okay with, Mason.
You remember me from last year. I was not a big Flott fan. I wasn't. Okay, he showed some flashes. I know. He showed some flashes. He did. I'm still not sold. But again, right now, is he our CB2? Or is it Robinson? How much faith
camp competition
right now?
I mean, I'd be happy with Corey Webster and Aaron Ross. You know,
touche.
So you know, I'd be happy with 2 guys that can play solid ball. You know what I mean?
So
give me guys that can play
Adoree
solid ball. You know, smart solid ball. Right, Adoree. You know, may not pick off a lot of balls, but hey, he plays solid ball. He stops it when he needs to.
Thank
right?
You.
That's a big deal. You can generate turnovers in other areas, right?
Yes.
That's where, Wink really loves that safety that can play off the ball, right? That can play that center field role, much like Ed Reed used to for him.
Yes.
And so that type of role, that type of safety is huge in this defense. So having that with a good man press corners, another guy that can, at least one of them being able to, force turnovers on the outside, having a good pass rush with some good coverage, play out of the linebacker position. I think we're going to have a solid defense, and I don't think that it's a problem. I mean, when you were talking about earlier, Steve, when the defense kind of slumped, they had both X and Adoree out.
Yes. And again, you mentioned a good point, Mason. In Wink's defense, all right, he's got pressure coming from a lot of different areas. All right. So my point is, and you've got Thibodeau, who's going to be another year in the league. Hopefully Aziz comes back healthy. Hopefully Beavers comes back healthy. So and you
absolutely
add Okieri as well, and I know I'm saying his name wrong, but
Okereke.
Him, thank you. So now, in my eyes, that makes Leonard Williams more expendable. That's why I'm saying. So when you asked that question, I was waiting for you to come to me. I want to see if Adoree steps up and gives us a full year of that shutdown corner that he was for the first half of last season before he went down. And the rest of these guys, they continue their development. I could see Leonard Williams going and Adoree Jackson staying.
I'll leave you guys with one final thought, and then I'll this. I think the way this usually goes is free agency dictates the draft, right? Free agency allows you to fill up some holes so you're not shopping hungry in the draft. I think more than ever, and Mason, you sort of touched upon this with that last wave of free agency, guys who get cut from other teams. Let's have some salary cap flex so he can sign guys that are like, wow, I can't believe that guy's a free agent. Let's go get him. Because of the draft. I think the draft this season is going to dictate what he does with some of these guys. So if, like again, one of the top 3 positions in the draft is running back. Nobody's really talking about drafting a running back in the 3rd or 4th or 5th round. You're going to get guys drafted in the 4th or 5th round of this draft, running back, that I promise you a decade ago would have been 1st or 2nd round picks. Nobody values the running back position anymore. Bijan Robinson, okay, he's a 1st round pick, but there's some, I mean, really great running backs, tight end and then corner. But all of a sudden we get a great running back. Now he's not only sticking with Saquon on the franchise, but now it's like he really doesn't need to be pressured into signing Saquon long term because he's got someone behind him that may very quickly become our starting running back for now. And the same thing that I said with D line. There's some really nice defensive line prospects, and there's more athletic freaks than we've ever seen at the D line position ever. I mean, there's guys running like sub 4.5s at the D line position in the draft. It's sick. There's only one Jalen Carter, but I mean, there's some freaks at the D line position, and Wink loves to take his D linemen and kind of play around with them. So I love Leonard. I'm still like, how can they play him? I don't want to see them move him or cut him. We need him next to Dexter, but man, you never know. They could get a D lineman in this draft who just is a monster, you know? So
That
I
kid
think,
out of Florida, the kid out of Florida, what's his name? Javon Dexter.
how about the kid out of Northwestern? I mean, there's a bunch of them that are just freaks or monsters. There's a lot of one-trick ponies too. There's a lot of guys that are just run stuffers or just penetrators and may not fit into what they want. But I think I guess what I'm trying to say is back to my original point. I think it's gonna who saw Wandale Robinson last year being picked by the Giants? But by that last game, when he finally got hurt, he went over 100 yards. I think we're all like, man, this is going to be crazy now with Wandale. And then he gets hurt. They know what they want. And I think this draft is going to dictate in many ways what they still may yet do with certain players, you know?
Guys, this was a great show tonight. Always a lot of fun. And Mason, we're glad you finally came on and joined us. Really enjoyed having you. You were a great guest, and you added a lot to the show tonight. So thank you so much.
Carl, Steve, thank you so much for having me, man. Absolute blast. Glad to be on, and look forward to seeing the edited version of this. So.
Steve, always a pleasure. Happy Passover, and
Thank you.
be well. And everybody, again, thank you so much for watching and for your continued support. We appreciate it. And keep your eyes open. We'll be announcing our next show very shortly. So thank you, everybody. Happy Passover to those of you that celebrate. Happy to Easter to all of those that you celebrate that as well. Guys, enjoy. Happy holiday weekend.
You too.
Thank you.